So I want to welcome all of you committee members out there. It would have been nice if we were actually in a room and could talk to each other and introduce in a different way, but that's not the way we live right now. And so I'm coming to you from Tillamook, and it's rainy and nasty here, which is normal. And so that it was nice in a sense to not drive to Silverton, I guess, tonight. But really appreciate all of you taking the time this evening to get together and start this process. It's going to be really interesting. Again, I'm Randy Shield. I'm former superintendent of Tillamook School District and partner in RS2 Education. The other half of that is Rob Saxton.
Hey everybody, right here. I'm Rob Saxton, the other part of RS2. We can never quite figure out how we got to RS, Randy's Shield and Rob Saxton, but that's sort of how it worked, I guess. RS2 Education. And I just want to let you know that in a minute, we're going to ask committee members to introduce themselves to each other. And we've got about 20 minutes for that tonight. And so we like to keep it fairly brief. And many of you probably already know each other, but Randy and I don't know you yet. And so it'd be great for us to get to meet everybody and for some of you to get to know each other a little bit. And so we're looking for your name, your relationship to the district. And it could be, you have kids in school, you attended yourself, you're a business person in the community, whatever that happens to be, and why you agreed to be a committee member. We're interested in that as well. If you could keep it brief, like 30 seconds or so, that would be great. And that way we could get it done in 20 minutes. And maybe just to kick things off, I thought I might introduce my partner, Randy Shield, and then maybe he can introduce me, and then we can go from there. So Randy, I think, was in Tillamook schools for about 50 years. So Randy attended school in Tillamook, then he became a teacher in Tillamook, then an administrator in Tillamook, superintendent in Tillamook for 19 years. He retired in 2018. In 2015, he was the Oregon Superintendent of the Year. And one of the things that used to irk me somewhat as I was superintendent in Tigard-Tualatin was how often people wanted to use Tillamook as an example of how it was supposed to be done in the district when Randy was the leader. And so I don't know how many times the governor and different committees would go out to Tillamook to see what they were doing there, but he just always did a great job as a superintendent. So that's my partner, Randy.
And Rob, the other half of this team, Rob was teacher for lots of years, a coach as well, principal out in McMinnville, and then became a superintendent at Sherwood. After Sherwood, he moved to Tigard-Tualatin and was there, and then was stolen away from there by the governor, who, when the state first decided to go to an appointed state superintendent of education, no longer be elected, so you could pick anybody in the state who was going to be your education leader. It was Rob that Kitzhaber chose, and he worked there, did some great things at ODE, really changed the culture of the Department of Ed. And then he retired out of there, but he failed in retirement and became superintendent of Northwest Regional ESD, largest ESD in the state. And he did that for a few years, and then he retired same time I did. And since then, we've been doing a whole lot of fishing and flipping houses and things like that, that actually at the end of the day, you can see you accomplished something, which we didn't seem to get a lot of in our other jobs. And so we have gotten together and we've helped superintendents around the state and districts around the state do some different things. And it's our pleasure anytime we get to meet a community and be able to help in some way. And our job in this situation is just to help facilitate you, your group, and a decision as you move forward. We're going to introduce our committee members, as Rob said, just real quickly. Probably the easiest way to do it is I'll just call the name and you can unmute yourself if you are muted. And again, just give a real quick overview of who you are, what your relationship to the district is, if there is one, and why you feel like being on this committee was worth your time this evening and a few other evenings. Let's start with one of our two Allisons. Oh, the only Allison, sorry. Allison Stolfus.
Hi, thanks. I'm Allison Stolfus. I teach science at the high school and actually have for almost 2 decades now. So been there for a while. I have 2 daughters in town. I have a kiddo that just moved over to Robert Frost from Mark Twain. And I have a kiddo at the middle school, who's actually started in Bethany. So this committee is interesting to me because I've had the pleasure of sampling quite a few schools in the district, and I got to be a part of teacher cadre years ago and go visit Prattham and Evergreen and Central Howell, and I just thought it'd be a real interesting group to be a part of, and I'm a vested person. So
very good, Allison. Sounds like you have a broad perspective. How about Alyssa?
Alyssa Wavra. I've got 4 kids in the district. Also a longtime Silvertonian. Grew up at going to a rural school, and then went to Silverton Union High School a few years ago. I also own a business in town, and just like to be part of the community in any way I can.
Very good. Thanks, Alyssa. I like that. I went to high school a long time ago, or a little while ago, whichever. Anna. Anna Torres.
I believe Anna is just one of the 2 folks who are not here tonight.
Okay, excellent. Let's move to Brittany.
Okay, I'm a teacher in the district. I think this is my 12th year. I have kids in the district. I have a son at the middle school and a daughter at the high school. I was asked to be on the committee, and I hope that my input will be valuable. I've worked at a lot of different schools within the district, so some in town, some of the K-8 buildings, and I just, hopefully will bring a little bit of perspective from teacher and parent view.
Excellent. Looking forward to that, Brittany. Christine.
I'm Christine Eubanks. I'm a parent. I have a 12th grader, an 8th grader at Silverton Middle, and a 5th grader at Community Roots. And I was asked, I have the time, so I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you. Courtney.
I'm Courtney Good, and I grew up in Silverton and graduated from Silverton High School. I now have 2 kids in 5th and 8th grade at Scotts Mills, and I was asked to represent that side of the community.
Very good. Thank you. How about Dave Adams?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm fairly new to the district. I've been here about 3 years. I have a current Robert Frost 3rd grader and also a current Mark Twain kindergartner. And what drew me into the group, I was a part of the K-5 work group. I'll say I was a little bit blindsided. I thought I was an involved parent, but I was shocked by the amount of educators and teachers who knew about the hard transition between 3rd and that here at the district, and would love to be able to do anything to help the district be a little bit better tomorrow than we are today.
Excellent, Dave. You'll bring great perspective having gone through that process as well. Aaron Scott.
Hi, I teach kindergarten at Mark Twain. I have 4 kids in the district. I have a 1st grader at Mark Twain, a 5th grader at Robert Frost, and a freshman and sophomore at the high school. I grew up here. I did not attend. I grew up here with my family. I attended school in Beaverton, but my parents both graduated from Silverton. My husband has lived here his whole life and graduated from Silverton. So living here forever.
Very good. Heather Johnson.
I am a dispatcher at the bus barn. I've been here about 15 years. I also grew up and graduated from Silverton High School. And my boss asked me if I would be a part of this.
So you got voluntold?
Pretty much.
Well, you'll agree, certainly we'll have a lot of discussion about transportation, the logistics around that, and you're going to be a key piece to that. So thanks for being here.
No problem.
Joanne?
Joni, yeah.
Joni, okay.
I am a 1st grade teacher at Mark Twain. I was also part of the K-5 committee, so I'm already kind of invested in this work. And then I'm also a parent, so I have 3 kids in the district. And yeah, that's it.
So you check most of the boxes. Thank you very much for being here. How about Kristen Norris?
What grade are your kids in, Joni, just so I know?
Sorry. I have a senior at the high school, and then I have 2 middle schoolers, an 8th grade boy and a 7th grade boy at Silverton Middle School.
Thank you.
Okay, Kristen.
Well, I grew up coming down to Silverton visiting family, and I absolutely loved it as a child. And then when I had kids, I decided that this is where I wanted to bring my kids up and raise them. And I'm very grateful that I have. My daughter graduated last year, well, 2020, this, the first senior of COVID. And my son is in the transition program. So we've been here for 20 years, and for 10 years, I've worked for the school district as a special needs assistant. And I'm invested in not only the district, but the community. And I just thought that this would be a really interesting process. And I like to give my 2 cents.
Very good. That's such a great testament to who you are as a community as well, to point to Silverton as a place I want to be. Kyle Henderson.
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Kyle. I'm a 4th grade teacher at Robert Frost. This is my 10th year at Robert Frost. I actually even student taught there. I actually am an alum from Robert Frost as well, and went through grade school, middle school, and high school through Silverton. Why do I want to be on this committee? Well, I was on the K5 committee earlier. Was that last year? And just kind of want to see this ride through. I'm a community member, and yeah, I think I have some input for the group.
Very good. Thanks, Kyle. How about Kyle Palmer?
Mayor Palmer is also unable to be here this evening.
Okay. And he would be the mayor then. Okay. Letty?
Letty is also not here, but I think with those 3 now, we have hit all 3 people who were not able to be here this evening.
No problem. How about Liz?
Hi, I'm Liz Lindbergh. I'm the reading specialist at Robert Frost. And prior to coming to the Silver Falls School District, I was in Gresham Barlow School District. So this is my 19th year of teaching. I have 3 kids in the district, 1 at the high school, 1 at the middle school, and then 1 at Robert Frost. And they've all gone through Mark Twain, or Eugene Field as it was. And I wanted to be a part of the process just so I could work together and hopefully come up with some solutions, and just having that perspective of being a parent and a teacher.
Very good. Thanks, Liz. Marcella?
I'm Marcella Sparrower. I'm a secretary at Silverton Middle School. I'm a former student of Silver Falls School District. I attended Eugene Field, Mark Twain, and I graduated from Silverton High School. And well, I was asked to join the committee, and I have time, but I also have the perspective of a student, former student, an employee, and as a parent, as I have a incoming kindergartner.
Excellent. Sounds good. Melissa Briggs.
Hey everyone, I am a parent. I have 5 kids, 3 in the schools right now, a 6th grader, a 5th grader, and a 1st grader. And I have 2 more that are coming. This is one of them. She wanted to say hi. I also went to school here in Silverton, and I was on the committee, the subcommittee. So I'm engaged in this, and want to see it through.
Excellent. Michelle.
Hi, everybody. Michelle Stadley. I grew up here in Silverton. I attended Victor Point School and Silverton High School. I teach at Silverton Middle School, and I have previously taught at both Robert Frost and Scotts Mills schools. So I have kind of a diverse perspective for the schools in our district. And I actually student taught at Eugene Field, which was where Mark Twain came from. And so I'm also the association president for our teachers. And so I was asked to be on this committee, and I'm excited about this work.
Very good. Thanks for being here. Nicole Guyer.
My name is Nicole Guyer, and I teach second grade at Mark Twain. And this is my 13th year teaching. And I am also a parent. I have two girls, a daughter who's in second grade at Mark Twain and a fifth grader at Robert Frost. And I was asked to be on this committee as a parent and as a teacher. So I'm excited to be on this and hear how it goes.
Very good. The last one I have listed is Sandra.
Hi, hello. My name is Sandra Cervantes and I work at Robert Frost. I grew up here in Silverton. I went to school from K to 6th grade, and I was asked to be a part of this committee. But I also thought it was important to be a part of this. And that's it.
Thank you very much. And it really, people look at me a lot of times as growing up until I'm going to school, teaching here, being an administrator here, and they go, wow, that's weird that you've stayed in one place your whole life. There's a whole lot of you that have done the same thing. And that's really cool because that creates a foundation that a lot of communities really don't have. And it provides so much in opportunity. So this would be a really cool mix for a committee to be able to work together on things with some new looks at it and also some good history about it.
Well, really great. Hey, thanks everybody for introducing yourself. We've got a couple other people who are on screen that I see. I see Superintendent Drew and Assistant Superintendent Dan Bush. Is there anybody else that I am missing here that I would point out that's just on? Okay, I don't see anybody waving their hand or anything like that. Anyway, really interesting to sort of hear all of that from you all. So really appreciate you sharing it. And we actually are right on time for agenda, which doesn't happen that often, but we're going to work really hard at trying to keep it that way. So before we go too much further, one of the things I wanted to let anybody else who's listening in on the meeting know, and first of all, probably for all of you, that we have this meeting open so that other people can hear us in our discussion. And so everybody should know that. And then I also want to make sure that at every single meeting, we're going to take public input. And so we'll give people an opportunity for public comment. But in advance, I want to let anybody who is listening that wants to give public comment know how to do that. We're going to start that at 6:40 this evening, or about 6:40. And so I just want to provide you with notice so that you can be prepared to do that if you want to. And in order to do that, you would use the chat feature on Zoom to request to speak. And then we'll have a person work with you to get that kicked up. If that goes sideways on you, which it can do, as we all know in this day and age, as we're using all this technology to do things, another way to do that is to email to the district feedback, the word feedback, at silverfalls.k12.or.us. And I'll give you that again so that if you need to write it down, you can. If you are having trouble with the chat feature on Zoom, then you can email feedback at silverfalls.k12.or.us, and that will kick you up on there, and then we'll be able to hear a comment from you. And again, that'll start at 6:40. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. So one of the things that's really important for any committee, I think, is to know what your charge is. That is, what you're supposed to accomplish as a committee. But before we go too far on that, one of the things I wanted to make sure as the facilitator is to let everybody know the number one direction that Randy and I have received from Superintendent Drew, and that is that he wants us to be really clear about his expectation for the process to be transparent. Every time we said, what do you need from this, or how should this go, or what needs to transpire, what do you want to accomplish? He'd say, number one is it has to be transparent. Any lack of transparency is not going to work for this process or for our committee or our community. We need to make sure that we're building trust and that transparency is really self-evident and clear. So hopefully Randy and I have that message, etched into our minds as we're leading this work. And so I would just say to the whole group that as we're moving through the process, we're going to check with you periodically to make sure that we're meeting that expectation and asking, hey, are we being transparent, or how would we improve our transparency here? And then additionally, we would ask that anytime the process feels like something isn't transparent, that you would stop us on the spot and tell us, hey, I think this lacks transparency. And here's why, so that we can go to work remedying the thought that it lacks transparency in any way. And that includes, just having everything out in front so that everything's being said and you have all the information, but also making sure that it never feels like the answer that you all are supposed to come up with is in any way predetermined. Randy and I are from outside of the community. We probably know less about this going in than any of you all do. We don't have any preconceived idea at this point in time about what we think ought to happen. The idea is for us to lead a process for you to say what the recommendation ought to be to Superintendent Drew. So if it ever feels different than that, please tell us that so that we can go to work fixing it. Randy.
So our charge, it's always good when you say, okay, I'll volunteer to be on a committee to know what you're here for. And so our charge is pretty simple in concept. Reach consensus as a group on a K-5 elementary boundary as you restructure, and that's it. And remember, as a committee now, we're coming together and we're going to make a recommendation to the superintendent about where we think lines should be drawn so that you can have the two K-5 schools, Robert Frost and Mark Twain. And we'll have a lot of discussions about how you do that and what our options are. But the bottom line is, together, we hope we'll be able to say in one voice, this is what we think should be done as you move forward for next year. Now, as we talk about what you will do, we also need to make clear what we won't. We're not going to have discussions about whether or not you should stay in a K1, 2, 3, or K3, I guess, 4, 5 setting. That decision's been made. And some of you served on that committee, and I know that changing structure is hard. And it took a bold group to come together to say, no, this is something we're going to do different. And so that decision's already been settled. Board's made that decision. And so we're not going to revisit that in this committee. Okay, that ship sailed. And as we find comment, I don't know anything about what's going on within your community. I would assume most people like this change, but there may be some who don't as well. And if they come in and want to give public comment on whether or not this change should happen for next year, that's really not our charge, and that's not what this committee is about. You will be going to a new structure starting next year. Our job is to figure out which students, where they live, are going to go to which school. And that's it. So any questions on that 30,000 foot view of what your job is going to be?
Or comments even.
The other piece I'll add to that is there's a lot of logistics that go into that big decision. We know that transportation's here. That's a logistic. Where you draw lines, obviously. How you transition into two new schools. Do you do it cut and anybody in a boundary goes there next year? Or do you have a transition plan to move students and families in away? Those are all pieces to this that we're going to have to decide on. But it's not on whether we're going to be K-5 schools or not. Okay.
So one of the things, all you teachers out there, is you have to give good wait time. So I'm going to give about 20 seconds of wait time here to see if anybody has any comment or question about that. And if not, then we're going to jump to public comment. So if you intended to be on public comment, you should line up for that a little earlier than what I said. So about 10 minutes earlier than I said. 20 seconds of wait time always kills me. Seems like days. Anyway, okay. So we have 20 minutes scheduled for public comment. There may be a lot, there may not be very much, I'm not sure. Like I said, we're going to provide this at every meeting, and we think it's really important for us to do that. And we're going to follow the same rules, basically, that are used at Silver Falls School District board meetings. So just to be really clear, this actually is a committee of the superintendent, which means that you don't actually have to have open public meetings. But if you're going to have transparency, it seems really smart to have open meetings like this and do this out in front of everybody. And so that's how we're approaching this. And that means that we think it's, as part of that, we think it's really important for us to allow for public comment. I also think that what the public has to share with you could really influence your thinking as we're going about making these decisions. And there'll be times that we'll have public comment specifically in a meeting because we want to have comment before you make a decision. And so that you can consider what the public comment, what they had to say. So with that, we're going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and read the document that always gets read into the meetings in order to, before public comment takes place, so that people know the rules. Because we're online, it changes just a little bit, but I'll walk through it anyway. What public comment says at the board meetings is, the board encourages citizens to share their ideas, opinions, raise questions, concerns, or compliments. If you wish to speak tonight, you can use the chat feature on Zoom to request to speak, or you can email to feedback@silverfalls.k12.ors. That's feedback@silverfalls.k12.or.us. And remember that we all model the way for our students, and we ask that you share your thoughts in a respectful way. Anyone providing public testimony is required to state their name and address at the time of speaking. All public testimony is limited to 3 minutes for each individual. Up to 5 minutes may be granted to groups of 3 or more with similar testimony. Please identify your group and designate one spokesperson. Due to time constraints, the maximum amount of public testimony is 10 individuals. When called, please state your name, relationship to the district, place of residence, and the subject which you will address. The board will not hear personal complaints concerning district personnel or against any person connected with the school system. Public input from an individual should be new information only. Those repeating previous testimony will not be allowed to continue. If you have any questions about the district, we encourage you to contact our superintendent, Scott Drew. Okay, all the perfunctory reading, only stumbled 2 or 3 times. And with that, we are open to public comment.
So I am monitoring both the chat and the feedback email. We do not yet have any requests, but I would suggest we wait a minute or 2 here and see if any come in.
Sounds good.
And this is one of the things that grows as you go through these meetings, especially if you ever put out there a this is what we're thinking the line's going to be, that just explodes public comment. And so these things will grow, and you are also the ear of the public. Now, there's a lot of staff involved here, but there's also your parents, you're in parent groups, you're in community groups, and so forth. You're going to start hearing things, and what you need to keep relaying to people is that if they're voicing opinions to you, you can share those opinions, and you can also say, why don't you come online, join the meeting, and tell everybody what you want to say as we start into these processes. Okay, anything yet, Derek?
Not a thing.
Okay, good deal.
Okay.
That'll change, it's okay.
It'll change. All right, very good. So one of the things I hope you heard in the charge that Randy talked about was that it's our intent for this committee to make some decisions by consensus. So we'd like to make sure that decisions are consensus based. And one of the first decisions that we need to make is what constitutes consensus. So it's easy to say we're going to make decisions by consensus, but if you don't know what consensus is, then we don't know if we've made a valid decision or not. So we need to identify what consensus is. One of the things that we thought that we might do in order to try to do consensus, because this is such a visual kind of an experience when you're online like this, is to use thumbs up to say, yes, I agree. I'm with that. If you put a thumbs up, that's what you mean by that. You can go sideways, which means, I could go along with it, but it's sort of, I'm lukewarm on it. I'd like to have a little more discussion perhaps, or let's talk about it a little bit. And sometimes what we'll say is, if you're here, what would it take you to get to, I really support it. So, we'll spend some time with that as we work through consensus on things. Or you can say, yeah, thumbs down. I really don't like this. I can't support it. And then we'll of course want to know why and see what it would take to get you to thumbs up so that we can continue to have discussions until we get to consensus. It is true that the thought that you're always going to solve everything with this kind of a model isn't true. Once in a while you get to a hard decision, and it's really hard to get every single person to be thumbs up or every person in just a few thumbs sideways. And so sometimes you have to get to a place where you're going to take a vote. And so if we're going to take a vote, we need to begin to identify what that means exactly. And so we thought we would present that as a possible model, and then in a minute, get down to the nitty gritty of exactly what that means when we're talking about votes and so forth. I'm gonna let Randy talk about that. But before we do, any thoughts about that as a model, any discussion, suggestions as we talk about that?
So how about if we're talking about the consensus model? I can live with, yeah, I like, no, I really don't like this idea. Let's use that model right now. So committee members, are you okay with using the thumbs up, sideways, or down as a consensus model? Look at all those thumbs. Love that. Okay, very good. Now, when you can't just come to a decision by a consensus, there's a lot more discussion, and all of a sudden you have situations where really you're going to have to come to a vote. And I don't expect that'll happen a lot of times, but it may. Then you have to decide, what does the vote mean? And so is a vote, in order to pass and say, yes, this is something we're going to do or something we're going to recommend moving forward, is that 50% plus one, or is that a higher percentage, or what is that? And so I'd like to suggest to you, and this is just a suggestion, we could certainly change other things, but one of the things I'd used lots of times is what they called the Saturn model, which was when you put a group together, they used a 70% agreement. If they had 70% of their group on board, then that's what it took to approve something. And if it was 70%, before there was ever discussion, everybody in the group said, okay, if 70% of us agree, then we're all going to move forward with it and be okay. We're not going to, even if I didn't agree with it, I agree that I'm not going to sabotage it, and I'll go along as long as 70% is there. Now, you could use 60%, you could use 90%. There's no real magic to this. And the numbers are pretty easy because there's 20 of us. So if we're using 70%, if 14 of us said, 14 of you said, yeah, this is what we think ought to happen, then we would all be on board going, okay, 70% said so, so I'm on board, here we go. So that's a suggestion. Are there any thoughts? I'm throwing out a number at 70%. Are there any thoughts that that's too high or too low? It is so hard to get interaction. This would be so much easier in a room. Okay, tell you what. If you don't want to speak up, let's do a thumbs. Is 70%, does that sound good to you? I can live with it. No, I think I'd rather like a different number. So let's see your thumbs. 70%, is that a good number? Got a sideways, got a wavering sideways from Liz. Okay. On the sideways, would you rather that number be higher or lower? Give me a thumb if you don't want to talk. Higher? Okay. So higher. So let's talk at 75%. That's 3/4 of you. So would you feel like the 75%, I feel like an auctioneer here. Would you feel like the 75% you could be good with? Thumbs up, thumb sideways, thumbs down.
75% would be 15 out of 20, yes?
15 out of 20. Okay, still sideways on a couple, a few. Is that number still too low? You want to go higher?
This is like The Price is Right. I would go 80%.
80%?
Yeah, that's my feeling.
Okay. And you're okay with the 80%? I don't see the names on there anymore, so I can't call you by name, sorry.
Joni and Kristen.
Okay, so both of those, you would be good with 80%. Let's see if everybody else is okay at 80%. Let's see a thumbs up, sideways, or down at 80%. Okay, so we have one sideways, one down, couple sideways. You think that's too high?
Just from if I could, just my perspective as far as why it's a little too high. From my perspective, I think we'll be trying to project out to some of the things we'll be talking about. I think a lot of decisions will depend on the implementation of various things that happen at each of the schools. With our group not being responsible for making recommendations for some of those policies or how those actual schools look, the decision may be difficult to reach that high just based off of it. The final details aren't determined. So it may be hard for us to get that level of consensus. From my perspective, if we're working through those that are either at the slightly or below with their responses, if we're giving adequate time for them to share, because all of those negative responses are specifically to either a public concern or a personal concern moving forward. So if we give time to those to kind of share those and then moving forward, I think that would be my approach. And I think 80 would be high, just projecting out some of the decisions that we might have to settle on. Okay.
Just the math of it, just because I was a high school math teacher once upon a time, I apologize. 80% is 16, so you need 16 out of 20. 75 is 15, and 70 is 14.
And that's if you have everybody in attendance.
If everybody's in attendance, yes.
Okay, so for a few of you, 70 was too low. And for at least one, actually two of you, I think 80 was too high. Can we go back to the question of 75? If we had 75% support, I'm going to ask that one again. Can you support the 75% based on the conversation that you heard and where other people are at? Thumbs up, sideways, or down?
Nice.
Okay, good. So 75%. And again, I think the key piece to this is, and you're very right in that there's going to be some hard decisions. There's going to be some suggestions that you're really going to have to leave up to the implementation of the district to figure it out. But there's going to be decisions that not everybody agrees on. And I think that's the value of a group, is to be able to work through those, just like this, to be able to work through those and say, okay, where do we go from here? The biggest part of this decision, though, that we need to remind you of is down the road when it gets hard, if you're not on that 75% side, that you agree to say, okay, if 3/4 of this group says this is the direction we're going to go, I agree that I'm not going to sabotage it. I'm not going to go out into the community and talk bad about this group or their decisions or anything like that. I'm committing, before I even know what the decisions are, that I'm going to trust the masses in this group, the 75% in this group, to help us go a direction that's going to be good for our kids and our district. Let's have a nod of head on that understanding, because that's a really critical piece as we move forward. And I don't think, just looking at you, that that's going to be an issue. And you know, we've got some really good things to do, and it'll be an exciting time in Silverton, and there'll be some challenges as well, and that's okay. That's why you were chosen. You know, they have an entire community of people who could have been on this committee, and every one of you were handpicked for a reason. And that's because they think you're good thinkers and are able to deal with the process and the issue that we have.
All right.
Okay.
Congratulations, you made your first decision. So we talked about what we're going to do, and we've actually done it once. So it's good to have some practice, successful practice underway, or actually not practice, real decision making. So one of the things that I think is really important too as we do this is for you to understand what's going to happen through the course of the process. And so there's a document that I hope we're going to be able to share on screen so that you can look at it. And then we'll also send a copy of it to you all in email. And it really is a document that lays out the process from first meeting to hopefully final decision in fifth meeting. Now, we know that we can get crosswise on these and maybe need another meeting or two or something like that, but we hope and think we probably can get this done in about 5 meetings. Certainly the way we're staying on course tonight with agenda, I think we can get that done. So I wanted to take a minute and walk you through the document because I think understanding how this progresses will make you understand it well and make you comfortable, more comfortable with where we are at different times in the process. I don't know about you, but when I don't know where a process is going, I'm like, wait a minute, we need to decide this right now. And if somebody would lay it out for me, I might understand we're going to make that in 10 minutes or maybe in the next 2 hours or something like that. And so I just want to lay it out for you. So hopefully you have a document. Do people have that that's being shared on screen? There we go. That one right there. And this basically lays that process out. And so we're at the top of the second page right now, quite frankly. And right there where it says item number 5, review draft of K-5 elementary boundary process, which is this plan. So that's what we're doing right now. And in just a few minutes when I'm done talking here, we're going to go to talking about a community survey that we want to put out. We'll give you a sample and then we'll ask you for feedback on the sample so that we can get a community survey and get that survey out really as quickly as possible tomorrow or the next day and have it out there for people to answer to. And we'll talk about this in just a minute so that we can have the results of the survey back to you at our next meeting, which is on December 7th. So we want to survey the community about this so that you have some information about what the community thinks about this in anticipation of decisions that you're going to want to make. So that at our next meeting on 12/7, and I'm just going to walk through the things that I think are important. So I'll skip over recap of meeting 1. Item 2, we're going to give you a report of what the community survey results said so that you know what those are. Public comment. And then item 4, we're going to give the committee input on how the process, what's important about how the process is conducted. So as we go through this process, what are some of the key things that need to happen in the process in order to make sure that we make good decisions and that it's one that can be seen as transparent, not predetermined, and that the community can get behind. So how should we conduct the actual process? Then item 5 is review the pertinent available information sources for consideration. So we're going to give you lots of information like current boundary map. What are some of the rules around transportation and some of the regulations that the state or policies that the district has about transportation that will change how we think about boundaries a little bit. There is a demographic study that was done by Portland State University. You'll need to see that so you understand what growth looks like in the district over time. And then there'll be some other things, and we'll ask you if there are some things you want to see or need, but there'll also be something that's called a Forecast 5 boundary manipulation software. And this is a software that can take, that has the address and location of every child in the district, their demographics, and we can then move boundary lines in the district in real time. And it will tell you how many kids then are in the new boundary and what the demographic totals are for all those boundary changes. And we can do that in real time, and we'll demonstrate that there and begin thinking about what some possibilities are. Then we'll also begin a process around decision-making priorities. This is item number 6, and it's the biggest part of this meeting. And it is, what are some of the, it will be asking you, what are the priorities that we need to use when we make decisions? Things like how close does the student live to the school proximity wise, like can they walk to the school? Do you want to keep neighborhoods together? Are there any transportation problems or boundaries that you ought to consider? How important are matching demographics around race, ethnicity, poverty, free and reduced lunch, special education, and so forth? And so we'll start talking about what are some of the things that you ought to consider when it comes to making this decision, and create a list of those things we want to consider and have a ranking process that says this would be most important to me of those, and this would be least important to me of those. We'll talk about the current boundary map. So that gets us through the first two meetings. Third meeting, we will, of course, recap, public comment, but item number 2, we'll have, Randy and I will have taken the ranking process that you did about what should be important about how the boundaries are set, and we will have compiled that so that you can know this is, as a group, what you said was number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This was most important, second most important, third most important in decision making around boundaries. And then we'll ask you whether or not that ranking makes sense, and we'll try to have a consensus decision making about the ranking of this is the most important, second most important, third most important thing when it comes to deciding what the boundaries should be. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And then we'll also do a presentation of the PSU boundary demographic study, and then a presentation of the Forecast 5 mapping capacity and the live boundary mapping. So we'll begin to show you what different boundaries do to student populations and numbers of populations, depending on where you happen to draw boundary lines. And we'll do that in real time with the Forecast 5 mapping software. Fourth committee meeting, this is on 121. And again, I'll try to hit the high points. Item 3, we'll do a presentation of the district intra and inter district transfer rules, so you know what transfer rules are. We'll have some suggested options. So this boundary or these boundaries or these boundaries, these boundaries or these boundaries. So we'll walk through some different possible boundary choices for you to look at and to consider. We'll also have a discussion of phase-in plans. So one of the things that could very well come up is, what should happen to kids who are currently third graders this year when it comes to where they'll attend next year? If we draw the boundaries, do they go to the school, or is there a phase-in opportunity for those third graders or those second graders or those first graders? So we'll have that discussion. That's item 5. And then item 6 is to begin making decisions and having conversations about the actual boundaries. We think it's important for the community to hear that discussion and understand where the committee might be leaning, so that if there's some public input that should be coming your way, we can begin to hear it and get some feedback from the broader community about where you're leaning with this decision. And then finally, the 5th committee meeting, we'll try to recap the previous meetings. Item 3, we'll have consensus decision recommendation to the superintendent of any phase-in. So we'll have a decision about phase-in, and then we'll try to have a consensus decision on a recommendation to be made to the superintendent for the boundaries for those schools for next year. And so that would be the process. We have 85 minutes set aside for that last agenda item, because I'm sure it's going to take at least that kind of time in order to finally get to a decision about that. We think it's important to have the phase-in discussion first, because it can temper where folks are on that decision making. So any questions, thoughts about that process, or anything that you think might need to be different in order for you to have what you need in order to get to a decision? This is a draft process right now, and so I should have said that up front, made it really, really clear. Is what we think is going to work. We're open to thoughts.
I guess one of my concerns is like areas of growth. So we have different parts of our community that are growing a lot more than other parts. And is that being factored in with?
Yeah, that's one of the things we're going to have a discussion about. Really, your current enrollment versus your school capacities. those will be questions, and you've got some big things on the table. I mean, right now you have these two schools that have a shared boundary. So the assumption would be that you're going to divide that in a way that now you have two schools, not of equal size, because one has capacity of about 350 and the other has capacity of about 450. And so that brings its own interaction there that you have to play with. But you also are a very unique district in that all around those two, you have other elementary schools that have influence, and you'll have to decide whether or not they're going to be touched at all or not. And so there's a lot of work to do. And I know a lot of you as staff members going, I don't need 5 evening meetings, but I'm telling you, this is going to matter to you as the future of this community. And so it's pretty important work.
And Kyle, we think there are two reports and then one other source that will really help us with this. One of them is the demographic study done by Portland State University. Portland State has a group that does nothing but demographics. It's like their school of demographics or something. I don't know what it's called, but they have done a demographic study for the district, and they talk about what the likely growth looks like for the district over time. And so we'll provide you with that, and we'll walk you through it a little bit too, but you can look at it ahead of time. Another one is a study done by a group called Echo Northwest, and John Tapania, the CEO of Echo Northwest, they do all kinds of number crunchings. I just can't even tell you all the different. If you read the paper, you'll see John Tapania mentioned all the time. I was on the phone with him today talking about a different issue, but they've done a really good study for the city talking about where growth is going to occur, how it's likely to occur, where and why, and different kinds of housing that are likely to come into the community, and the different kind of housing that the community should have in order to have rational growth over time. And so, and any bank of land that they need to have from now until 2040. And so they've done a study that predicts all of that. I've read it. It's really kind of boring stuff, but kind of interesting in a nerdly sort of way too. So we'll provide you with that. And then lastly, we'll go to city planning and talk to city planning about what's happening, what's likely to happen, what's their vision of this. Is it any different than Echo Northwest? So those are kind of the 3 places we'll try to get that information for you.
You know, you've heard the statement that the devil's in the details, and the reality is that when you chose to go away from your current setting, it made a lot of sense in transitions and things like that. It also comes with the assumption that you can draw a straight line through town somewhere, and you're going to have the exact right number of 3rd graders in each school, and they're going to be half boys and half girls, and they're all going to be able to walk to school or get on a bus right in front of their house. The logistics of that are really tough. And so the details of this, most people don't even begin to understand how refined and intricate they're going to be as you go through this process. And so there'll be a lot of work to do. We do believe that the Forecast 5 tool is unbelievably valuable. We've seen it demonstrated. That's something that most of us, as we've gone through these things, have had to do by hand on a map on the wall. And this can do it much, much more quickly and more efficiently with a complete set of information. And so I believe we have the tools we need to do the very best possible. The fact of the matter is, it will change over time. You won't always have the perfect number of 3rd graders, even if you have it set up for next year. It will change because kids will move and they get older and so forth. And so, you know, there will be times when it has to be adjusted again down the road.
Dave, I see with your hand up.
Yeah, just a clarifying question. You went fast for me on the pages, and I just wanted to double check the kind of the change management process with the community, specifically kind of the marketing plan and the communication strategy as we go through each of these components. Can you kind of talk through what's the expectation and where do you expect that to come from, and how that looks?
Yeah, I didn't talk about that at all, actually. Randy, what were you going to say?
Well, I think that like any good committee, you need to constantly be able to report back out to public, and that should be done at a district, at an US level, that gets information out, says committees met for the first time, and here's kind of where we're at. And then the second time, here's what we're thinking as we move forward, and that starts generating interest. I chaired the OSAA reclassification committee one time, a long time ago, and we didn't get a lot of interest, a lot of input until we put out a scenario and said, this is what we're thinking. And then you get way all the interest you want. And I think that's important to do because you've got to know.
So there are a couple things we are going to do. We'll communicate on the district's website. So there'll be some things there, and then we'll also, there's going to be some electronic and social media deliveries. So I think that it's going to be with the Twitter groups and that kind of thing that currently exists that the district has, where communication will be sent out that way as we move along. And then I know that there'll be some communication between ourselves and the communication lead in the district to talk about the details of the rest. But I think that's a really good point, Dave, that keeping the community informed about what's happening as we move along is going to be super important. I think as soon as the survey comes out tomorrow or the day after, that we're going to talk about here in just a second, it'll start to get people's attention, and we're going to need to send that as broadly as we possibly can through all those different kinds of avenue. And that will be the first opportunity to say to people, hey, something's going on here, and we want feedback from you on it. And I think that will start to trip people to the fact that something's taken place.
I also think that you guys can help in the avenue to get that out in the best way possible. You know the community, that's why you're on this committee. And so I think you'll be able to say, hey, I haven't seen it here, and that might be a place we can reach this group of parents or this group of the community that might be interested in this process.
Other thoughts, or I thought that was really good, Dave, and it will have us be thinking about that in more depth and make sure that we get some things moving along on that really well. Other thoughts, suggestions, changes? Christine.
I am wondering if you would just give a brief overview on how this decision came to be. I'm just joining the group, and it'd be nice to know, not that we'll see anybody to be asked this, but just in case we're asked, it'd be nice to kind of have an understanding of that.
How did the district decide to go to a K-5 model? Yeah. I think Scott looks like he just unmuted.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. Well, this work started a couple of years ago, actually, and it started with a work group that did a study on capacity, and then also looked at research about what happens when kids go through the grades, and the issues that also happen when you have a transition between second and third grade, which is a very, very important age for kids, particularly when they're learning how to read and keeping that continuum going. And that report's available. It's on Board Book if you want to take a look. I believe it was from the September board meeting, and it's on there, or I can send you a copy, Christine. But that was the real reason. And then of course there was a few changes that happened in the district with leadership and everything else. So it took a back seat for about a year. And so when I came on board, I quickly saw that needed to be one of the highest priorities for this district, to make sure that we reconfigure those two schools so kids have 6 consecutive years of consistency in their education.
Great question. Thanks, Scott, for answering. Dave.
Sorry, one last comment, and then I'll let other members talk. But so I was a part of that work group. You had also mentioned any other comments or feedback that the group should consider. Just my perspective as a parent, I had done a couple, as going to college, I'd done a couple of practicums at a couple of the elementary schools in Corvallis. And I thought I was a parent that was kind of in the know and kind of setting my student up for success. And I was kind of blindsided by the aspect of the transitions. So I think as we move forward and we communicate messages out to the community, if we can at all underscore the aspect of the benefits to the students, the aspects of, currently it's not I would say either a state or a national best practice to have the current model, and a couple of those other things that we can market out. Because I think this is going to come to, I won't say a shock, but a lot of people probably aren't going to be in the know that this is moving forward. I think once again, if we talk through some of those marketing strategies and we underscore those benefits to the students above the work that we're doing to reboundary, and that's just part of the reason why we're moving to the schools. We need to do the reboundary, but these other aspects are so much more critical for the district to be a better district. It's going to help out, I think, in some of that kind of shock and awe, as I was when we first started this discussion back during this time frame Scott was talking about.
Great reminder.
Yeah, I think it's really, really wise too, Dave, to remind us that as we start communicating about the idea of boundaries, that we reiterate the reason that we're readjusting the boundaries and the purpose it was that drove this committee to recommend that. Yeah, good idea. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, one of the first steps in this process for us is, again, trying to get as much community input and feedback as possible. And so one of the things we've referred to several times tonight is the survey. And surveys, you can go, 1,000 different ways, and we feel like we get surveyed to death in schools. But in this case, we feel like going out to the community, going out to our staff and so forth and saying, tell me the things that are going to be most important in this process is going to be critical to us. And we need to do that, we feel like, quickly over the course of the next 2 weeks. So we put together a draft survey. I think Derek can pull it up there for us. And this is very much in the big draft, as you see draft across it, very much in the big draft form. And this, there's a lot of ways you can go with surveys. You can be very specific, or you can be very broad in what you're asking. And this one is very broad. It starts first with just a little demographic information so that we know who's filling it out, whether their they have children in the system, and especially specifically at one of those 2 schools, or if they're a community member, or if they're an employee. So we can kind of break things out a little bit, and we can see maybe some trends one way or the other, depending on those 4 areas. And we may want to shift and put others in there as well. This really has 2 main questions in this survey. The first one, or what are the top 3 things you want the committee to consider as they make decisions in regard to the K-5 boundaries. Now, there's a lot of ways to ask that question. You can ask that question and give 4 examples and list 10 different things that may be important to people, may be important to the committee, or you can leave it completely wide open. In this case, we've left it open. That gives people to put the opportunity to put down whatever they want to. That doesn't make them or have them have ideas that came from us. And so that's one way to go, but we'll have discussion about that. The second main question are, what are your top 3 concerns or worries about the K-5 boundary decision? It's always important to know what people are most concerned about or what they're anxious about as we head into that process. Then the 4th question in this process is, what would be important to you about how the committee conducts a process in order to improve the validity? Back to that whole statement of we need to be as open and transparent as possible. What is it that people need to see out of you as a committee to trust your recommendation going forward? And then 5, are you or your child a member of a specific demographic you'd like the committee to be aware of? And there's some examples there. This is one of the questions, number 5, that could be put back in number 1 under demographic information that if people would like to share. It could come into play. You just don't know. If your Hispanic community is is saying one thing and they're identified in that area, that may be something that'd be very important to you as a committee. And so demographics might be an important piece to this. And then an open-ended question of what else would you like the committee or facilitators to know as they go through this process. So that was a sample. Rob, you put it together. Your thoughts now looking at it?
Even though we put it together, Randy and I both had suggestions for improvement today as we were looking at it. But we also thought you all would probably have some suggestions for improvement. One of the things that we do want you to understand is that Randy and I are going to take these and tally up what it is that we hear from the community. And so we're going to actually sit down, write up what we hear responses and put tallies next to ones that are similar and present this information back to you at your second meeting on December 7th. And so the question that I would have of you is, what would you want to hear from the community about in order to do a good job with this process or a better job with your decision making in the process? So if there's something that you think you ought to hear from the community, this is where we'd want to put it. And are there ways for us to gather the information better in a better way or with a better question or improved language? We talked a lot about number 2 and whether or not people would understand what the word consider means, for example. And so we're open to thoughts and suggestions on this to draft.
First, can you clarify what you consider to be the community?
Well, I believe the community is, anyone who lives within the Silver Falls School District boundary or has kids that attend in Silver Falls. So you could have somebody who has an inter-district transfer in, maybe they live in the Salem School District or Staten or something like that, but their kids attend there. We think that's the community. And it also is anyone who works in the school district. Other questions, thoughts? We talked.
What is it?
Go ahead.
What is it as a group that you really want to hear from the community that's going to help you in this decision-making process?
And just so you know, as a facilitator, I'm not seeing you right now. I'm seeing the document. And so if you have some, if you're raising your hand or something, I'm missing it. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, now we're seeing you. Dave.
My thoughts on question number 2, I'm just going back to the work group. There was quite an extensive time. If we went back to some of the notes of list of some of those concerns or pinch points of at least the committee group, since the last question number 6 is asking that open-ended, I wouldn't mind seeing a pre-populated list of some of the things within this group's scope that we could affect and see those pre-populated and be able to see and have them check off those in question number 2 that we would be able to have be able to change or do something with.
So can you give me a couple examples, Dave, just to make sure I understand?
A couple of example of some of the pinch points or pre-populated, something like my individual situation, have a process for my individual situation to be accounted for when the rules are finalized. I'd have to go back to the actual question and look at the specific words, but I mean, that would be, I think, one example.
Yeah, and so why don't we put the document, go ahead and put the document up, and then what I would tell you is that if you want to speak, just jump in, identify yourself, and then we'll go from there.
So let's as a group then generate what a list would look like. What are the things that you think as a group we're going to need to consider as we look at this K-5 boundary?
Exemptions.
This is Erin Scott. I might be interested in knowing what the community feels about the priorities that you mentioned, you know, as far as keeping not school districts, keeping neighborhoods together, you know, all those questions that you mentioned. I might be curious about how the community feels about that list also.
And just, Dave, is that what you meant when you were talking about different things like keeping neighborhoods together?
Yeah, my question, my reference to the work group was that there was, you know, a list of those items.
Okay.
And yes, I agree. The point of the survey, we'll want to capture the community's thoughts on them. But if we could populate, other than instead of keeping it open-ended, if we were to able to, like you had said, come up with a list of those and give kind of a checkbox or a priority, that the participants of the survey could utilize that list instead of kind of thinking of an open-ended. It may be helpful to get a better response out of them if we were to pre-populate something on this question, since we already have a open-ended number 6.
Okay. And also, just so you know, I mean, this is good and we can definitely do that. It also is one of the things that we're going to really get to in our next meeting. I think it's second meeting, where we talk about what are the things that should drive, like, if you were going to if you were going to pick the number one thing that you think that you as a committee should use as a decision point around boundaries, what would it be? So we'll walk, actually, so we can get feedback from the community on this, but then we'll actually walk through that with you individually. So it may be, we think there should be exactly even numbers of students at both schools. I mean, I'm just making that up as an example, or that, you know, demographics around wealth distribution are incredibly important on this. We want to make sure that free and reduced lunch is fairly balanced at both schools, or, you know, we want to keep neighborhoods together, or if it's walkable, we want our child to go to that school. There's a whole bunch of different ones, and one of those has to be the most important to the committee broadly, and something needs to be number 2 and number 3 and number 4, so that when we get down to it, we can use those things to actually make the decision. But we can start to gather that in this survey from parents, and Randy and I, you know, can come up with a pretty big list, or we've got a little bit of time tonight if you all want to generate some more.
You know, as a parent or community member, I would, one of my first questions would be, will there be language services at both campuses, and will there be special ed services at both campuses? You know.
Yep.
I wouldn't know how to answer this question without knowing some details about the setup.
No, but I think one of the things you would do there is balancing special ed services, balancing language services, things like that. Those would all become priorities and could certainly be put on this list for the community to choose their top, you know, 3, 4, whatever that might be, depending on the size of the list. Those are really good things to consider and to prioritize as you go through this process.
In the conversation with you all, one of the things I recognize is that there's going to need to be a nice lead-in statement at the top of this so that people understand what this is even about. There was a committee that made a decision. We're going to be K-5. Now we're going to set boundaries for these 2 schools. There's a committee that's doing that work. This is a survey about that. And we've got to do a really nice job of communicating what this document is. So we'll have to add that to the top.
Can you reread the number 6 question for me, please?
Yeah, can you see it there?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I was just, my question was, and I just wanted to make sure that there was a place for open-ended comments, because like Christine, I wasn't in on the original planning group, the committee to decide to go to a K-5. I love it. But I don't know what any of the comments were before, but my thought is that those comments and concerns would have been pro K-5 or against K-5. So it's kind of a different scenario that we're talking about now.
Yeah, I think what you probably did talk about in those groups, though, were the advantages and disadvantages, and the things that were, good in one setting as opposed to more of a challenge in another. And so I would imagine if we looked in that work group's notes, there might be some things that would cause us to think and then generate some lists of priorities on here as well.
Randy, would it help if we had one of the original members of the work group speak to that precisely, or
Yeah.
Melissa, would you like to say anything about that?
I'm happy to say something. I guess what exactly, I'm having a little bit of a hard time following what the question is. What from the original work group are we?
Sort of what was around the advantages and disadvantages of going to a K-5 reconfiguration?
Okay. So yeah, we looked at advantages and disadvantages. And overwhelmingly, there was more advantages. Being able to keep the kids with the same teachers and the same school community, same, everyone for a longer period of time, even as far down to as just the parent-teacher association. Currently the two schools, they have families that they can support and get involved for just 3 years, and then that's it. So oftentimes by the time a family has gotten the hang of, oh, this is how this school works and here's how I can get involved, then they're transferring to a different school. And at the same time, right as a kid is learning, going from learning to read to reading to learn, they're changing schools, changing all of that again. There's more disruption. So those were the two big advantages. But then it even went down to little things like currently Mark Twain has a problem with parking and buses and all of that in that small little area. And we sort of looked at, well, maybe if we had, older siblings, fifth graders that are walking their younger siblings, there's less traffic. That might help. What else? There was more things. Just, it seemed like there was overabundance of advantages. And really one of the only disadvantages that we could find was that we didn't want this to break our town into two sides. And so that was what pulled us back, but overwhelmingly it was all good things.
I think what it said in the original work group was that there was a concern over having a haves and have-nots, and that just goes to Melissa's points.
Right.
I think Christine raised a really good point, though, because this change does stretch the district a little bit differently as well. If you're going to run a specialized SPED program, for example, now if you're doing it for your K1 students, you're doing it in two different buildings. And so there's going to be some logistical questions as we go through that you have to turn to Scott and say, okay, if we're going to make this choice, are we going to provide two services, or are all these students going to go to one building? If you have a dual language program, for example. So there's lots of those types of things that will be challenges. So what I'm hearing is that a list in question number 2, a list that I think Rob and I with help from a couple others could probably generate as possibilities to have people not rank them all, but list or check their top 3 or 4, again, depending on how many we have. Also have a place for other that they can list, and this then would inform us as we go into our discussion at the next meeting about what the priorities, the key priorities are for us to keep in mind as we make this decision.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah.
You mentioned that we needed to decide if this was going to be a boundary change just within the two schools or across the district. Has that been decided? Or I'm kind of feeling like if we're going to send this survey out across the district, we might want to know that answer before we start asking people. because people are going to jump to a make assumptions one way or the other. So I feel like we might need to have that decision. If it's not made already, we might need to have that decision made before we put this out there for everybody.
So that question, first of all, goes to Scott and then to the committee. I guess Scott would set the parameters to say, no, all other boundaries are off limits. Committee, you're only looking at these boundaries. Or Scott could say, you need to look at the whole to make it the best system possible. And so what's the direction, Scott?
Our intent is just to look at the attendance area shared by Robert Frost and Mark Twain. But being that there's a million different scenarios we could go through, that's why we have representation, of Scotts Mills and Butte Creek and Silvercrest as well, just in case. So I don't think that it's reasonable to say it's 100% not going to affect the boundaries outside, because we don't know. And that's the whole work of the committee. And that's why we're really focusing on the transparency of it. But to the greatest extent possible, this is a decision that's being made in the Mark Twain, Robert Frost attendance area. And we also have to understand we're working with two buildings that have different capacity levels too. And anything's possible, but the charge of this group is to draw a boundary within the Mark Twain, Robert Frost areas, and it's not to redraw the boundaries of the whole district.
Okay. Does that help, Aaron?
My biggest question is just about Pioneer. And when we're sending all, K2 kids to Mark Twain, it maybe made more sense to send Pioneer out to Silvercrest. But if we're not, and we're able to spread the wealth a little bit, then does it make more sense to keep Pioneer in town? That was really, and as far as Butte Creek, if their numbers are dropping, does it make sense? It just kind of feels like, even though this is a Mark Twain, Robert Frost issue, well, it really spreads out a little bit more.
That's right. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments about the survey?
I think the year might be wrong in the survey. Shouldn't it be 2021 to 22?
It should be.
Yeah.
Good job. Got sucked into the vortex of 2021 or 2020, I guess.
Please, let's not do 2020 again.
Let's not. Good catch. Good catch. Thank you.
Also on number one, the third option, it should say I am a community member.
Yep.
Okay.
So I just want to ask real quickly, is this going to be translated into Spanish to share with our Spanish speaking families?
Yes, it would have to be. So, and then the avenue to get the surveys to our Spanish community and have them returned, that's got to be critically important in the process.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And someone did say that we are going to have some sort of paragraph in the beginning that it kind of explains why we're doing this, right? Because I think a lot of people aren't going to understand what's going on.
Right. If you just get this, if you what is this about, right? We're going to have to be very clear and concise, I think, because nobody wants to read a book. This is what this is about. Especially as I've heard people talk, and it seems like there may be less awareness of this than not that much awareness of it, and there will be some soon. This communication.
I also have one other comment about potential questions for the survey. I always like to add positives, and I don't know if it would be beneficial to add kind of a marketing plug at the beginning where there's a question that talks about which of these positive attributes are you aware of for a K-5 elementary school versus the current system, or however you'd like to word that, but listing out several of those positives to identify if community members are aware of some of these positives of the transition that we're, or is it maybe new information to them? That'd be interesting. If I was to ask them, it'd be interesting to know that answer.
Yeah, you could do that in a question, or you could do it in a statement, as part of that statement to say, hey, we're going to the K-5 and these were the things that were identified by the board as the reasons.
Very good. Thank you.
I like that. Anything else on this?
So I'll raise a question about number 5. It says, are you or your title member of a specific demographic? Would that make more sense to put at the beginning as one of those check boxes like we had in number 1? Is it something that you want identified, don't identify? It would be voluntary, obviously. Does it have value to you?
I think it definitely has value. One of my biggest concerns is equity. And so I think to identify concerns that are coming from different groups is really important. I don't know if it matters where it is. I don't know. Someone else can speak to that. But.
This is Michelle Stadley. I would definitely agree with Melissa. And I think the more we can get people to volunteer that information, the more valuable that demographic work will be within our community.
Great.
It seems like there's 2 different questions. In the beginning, you're asking whether you want that factor to be included in the decision. And then number 5 is, do you identify it as one of these groups? And those seem like 2 different questions. Because it could be everybody that might be important to everybody, right? You might be someone who says, it's really important for me, for my child to have, to go to school with children who look different than them or who look the same as them. It could go either way. That could be a factor that is important. And then to know if the person answering represents one of these groups, that seems like a different piece of information that could be valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So Christine, just so I know, so you would recommend keeping it where it is as a separate question, or would you?
I think yes. And then I think having that as one of the options, because in number 2, you're asking, do we want this to be factored into the decision of where the boundaries are?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
For me, I struggle with this question because I'm not sure exactly the answer that we're trying to get at. In my head, when I read question 5, I kind of, I guess I would say I somewhat read it. Does the current, so I'm kind of thinking outside of the question, does your current grade configuration either have an aspect of community that you want to keep, or does the current environment have, would you rather have something new, or would you want it to be different? And I know I want to see if is there a better way to ask the question to get more out of people, because I don't know if the way it's currently asked, if we're going to get the right information that we want from people. Because I'd like to know, is their current environment somewhat undesirable? Do they want to keep things from that current configuration, or are they wanting to gain, or are they looking to, what would I like in a different environment? If we go to a different grade configuration, what would I hope that environment looks like? Does that make sense?
Which question are you talking about?
Question number, I thought we were talking about question number 5.
Okay, good, thank you. Yeah, I think part of it is that we have these earlier questions, and if you get to question 5 and you see you see that, hey, look, there is a common concern among parents, or a common desire, whichever it may happen to be, among parents who have children in special education programs. And there's a consistency in the way that they're answering questions 1, 2, and 3, or something like that, that looks different than maybe parents who don't. Or if the Latino community was answering a question in a very specific way. I think it's really important for the community to know that and understand it, and or for us to be able to dig into that a little bit further in an effort to try to understand it and help you all make a decision that meets their needs. Does that make sense? So we're trying to ask a question so that we can begin to ascertain if there's something specific that we're hearing from one of these populations.
Yeah, I think number 5 was really a demographic question about who's answering the survey, and us trying to match the demographic of the person answering the survey with their answers, so that we can kind of dig in a little bit deeper and understand a little better. For that reason, I think if we have that up front, then it's easier to kind of separate a survey and then the answers. And what we're seeing is this group is answering in this way, to be able to report to you as feedback. A lot of times we don't hear a lot from our quiet parts of our community. You know, in Tillamook, a lot of times it was our Latino folks who loved what we were doing, but did not love to come to our meetings and tell us what they needed or wanted. And we had to find different ways to reach out and find that, which is why it has to be translated. It has to get out to everybody in our district that has input to give.
That makes sense. Kind of having it sandwiched in between the open-ended questions made it kind of, I agree with you on the placement of it.
Yeah.
Maybe we either include it as number 1 or we make it number 2.
Sure.
And then go from there. So one of the things that that we're hoping that we can get to here is some kind of an agreement about the survey and what it would say and what it would ask, so that we could actually write it up and put it out. And so we need to figure out how we're going to get to a decision about that. And so Randy, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I would say that my recommendation would be to incorporate question number 5 into a demographic question, either as part of number 1 or a 1B or 2, whichever the case was. Number 2, we would create a list of options that people could choose from as the most important, or put an other that they could add to. Question number 3 would be your top 3 concerns, very open-ended about the process. And question number 4, what would be important to you about how the committee conducts this process in order to improve the validity? May play with the wording there just a little bit, but really a question about process in there, and then an open-ended final question. And so, other thoughts? That's my stab.
And then at the top, or in the opening, that we're really
Correct.
clear and concise about what is this, why is this survey arriving, what's this about, and a precursor explaining that there's been a decision made in the district that we're going to have K-5 school in town, and here are some of the reasons that decision was made. Here are some of the positive things that will come out of that decision when it comes to how kids receive their programming.
So with all those things being said, we've kind of put a framework, a mental framework. Derek, if you could switch us back to being able to see everybody. It would be, Rob and I would work to put a survey together. You'd have to trust us, which is really scary because you don't even know us, but you'd have to trust us to put information out there and then collect that over the course of the next 2 weeks. We'd spend about a week to compile that, and then we would bring that to you in our next meeting. That would be kind of the direction we would go. So, question, Dave.
Just one other thought in light of Scott's comments about the scope staying within the 2 elementary schools in town. Just one other suggestion to maybe relook at the title of the survey that goes out, just to make sure that's a little bit more clear.
So I think it'd be a good question for Scott. Are you going to intend for us to survey the people within these boundaries, or is Silverton as a community, or Silver Falls School District? What's the reach of this survey?
Well, for me, and what my original thought was the entire Silver Falls community.
Okay.
My only concern was, and I agree, I would like to get feedback everywhere with the title of the survey. It may read to people taking the survey in Victor Point that the district boundaries may be relooked at for elementary kids within Victor Point School District.
So I think that will be helped by the opening statement that says these two schools are being reconfigured into this structure. And so that won't alleviate all the concerns, because obviously there's some nuances that are going to come into play, but probably would alleviate most of them.
And I think we could specifically put the name of the two schools.
Sure.
Title Mark Twain, and yeah.
All right.
If we do that, that probably.
So I've thrown out a suggestion, took a stab at what a survey would look like. Let's go through the consensus process of a thumbs up, a thumbs I can live with, or no, I'm not liking what I'm hearing. So
Hey,
thumbs.
Randy, can I interject one thing real quick?
Yes, Brett.
Just to help understand where we're getting the feedback from, maybe at the beginning, somebody could check whether their kids go to in-town schools versus K-8s. I don't know if that might be valuable to know where the input is coming from. It may not change it that much, but it's just a checkbox at the beginning. I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility.
I think if it's going out district-wide, that probably has a lot of validity. That's something you may care about.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand why it's going district-wide and why a Prattam parent is going to really care about this.
I think our thinking was just to be as inclusive as possible. And you know, Silver Falls School District also has a really interesting way of transfer. We have open transfers in this district too. And so it's just a way to try to be as inclusive as possible with our entire Silver Falls community.
It was kind of having that same thought, is that, you know, they might be at Prattam or Victor Point or somewhere because they want that consistency for their kids over the long haul. So they might actually have some skin in the game to come back to an in-town school if they've been going out of town.
They might have some insight too that's valuable. So.
And probably a lot of them will decide that it doesn't concern them. They're not going to do the survey. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions before we call for the question again? All right. Do you trust Rob and I enough to put this together and get it out to people? Thumbs up, sideways, down. That's kind of a judgment statement, isn't it? Sorry. So, okay, I don't see any thumbs down. So we'll put something together here, and we'll have information that we'll be able to bring back to you at the next meeting.
Which actually will be really fun for us to start to get some information back from people about all of this. So good deal. And I think that just about brings us to a conclusion. We wanted to talk. We want to make sure we want to send you via email a copy of the current district boundaries. You know, what the boundaries look like. I've got a map up behind me here. It's really, really professionally stuck up on my wall right there. But we'll send you a map that looks better than that and doesn't have blue tape stuck on it. But just so that you can see, you know, kind of what boundaries look like now. We think it's important for you to start to familiarize yourself with what this looks like on a map, as opposed to sort of what we all probably have in our heads. You don't need to go in-depth study or anything, just get a general idea. And really, there are the two schools that we're talking about creating a boundary change for. So it would be not just where everything is, but what are some sensible kinds of places where this might be a possibility within that current single big boundary of the K2 and 3-5. And so there is that. What else do we have, Randy?
Well, I think just a look ahead to next time. December 7th is our next meeting at 6 o'clock. Remember, community survey results coming back, review the tools that we're going to use in the decision-making process. There'll be a lot less. This was kind of like the first day of school. Some kids love it, some kids hate it. You got to go through the processes and set up kind of how you're going to run as a group. In that meeting, we'll also prioritize the criteria that we'll be using as we move forward in the recommendation. And we'll also review some transportation stuff. Transportation obviously becomes a big deal as you go through this. And so that'll be part of our discussion next time as well. You're welcome to email. I've emailed all of you, I believe. Is that how we did that? And if you have questions, make sure you send us an email, call us. Our phone numbers are on there too. And reach out if you have any questions, thoughts, ideas, stuff like that. We're here to help you.
We also said at the beginning, we were going to ask you if it feels like we're being transparent and or have any predetermined decisions. And so, hopefully we're going along there. But is there anything about the meeting tonight? One of the things I know is that it feels like with this online model, once in a while, we bring suggestions and ask for feedback. And I think you'll see us do that sometimes. It worries me a little bit about whether or not that seems as transparent as it needs to be. I think you'll see a lot of stuff, though, come to us from us that says draft. And we hope as you make suggestions that we are willing to change things in a way that improves them and makes sense to you. And that is part of the transparency, I guess, that causes that makes it feel that way, that it would be transparent. Anything tonight, transparency wise or predetermined decision wise, that you want to give us feedback on, or that you think we need to be thinking about before we go to a next meeting?
I do have a question about survey results. You said the two of you will be analyzing those. Will there be other people that will be included in looking at those survey results?
There won't be, but we'll keep all the surveys so that if anybody wants to see them or whatever, we actually would have them so that anybody could look at them and see if they would get to the same result or not. So anybody on the committee that wants to see a copy of the surveys that got turned in, we'd be happy to share those with you and have you compile them yourself. But that hopefully that would help with that. And so we'll keep copies of all that stuff, and anybody can look at them if they'd like to. Great question, Liz. Thank you. Other things?
Yeah, I would, is this for next year, implementing for next year, or, okay, just make it clear on that.
Absolutely. This is for implementation next year, Kyle.
Yeah, and that's why our goal is to get this done by the February board meeting, so a recommendation could come to them. There's going to be a lot of things that have to happen, and the sooner parents know that, community knows that, the better off you'll be. Scott, when he originally talked to us, said we have to have a decision by April, not to leave a door open, but our goal is to have this done by February, because I think that gives your district the best lead time possible.
Okay, on that note, then I would make a recommendation for Scott or our new principal, Leslie Carsley, or Greg, to make that solid. I've had several text messages just asking, is this happening? When is it happening? So I think that the more transparent we can be with teachers, like, yep, this is happening. It's no longer a discussion.
Yeah.
Thanks, Liz.
Any other thoughts or comments before we go? Again, I really appreciate your time. I know that you give a lot, and given another evening, and now you know that it's 4 more after this. I really appreciate the fact that you're here and you're engaged and you're willing to enter into this work. A lot of tonight was set up. Next time we get together, there'll be a lot more roll your sleeves up and let's start figuring this out. And the thing you have to know is that Rob and I are going to learn from you in this process, and our job is to help your wisdom come together and make the best decision possible. And that'll be our goal. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and hope you have a good rest of the evening.
Fun to meet you all. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Night.